that.
We can do that. Welcome. This is another discussion-esque video where we talk about things in video games. This is my
Things and games.
this is my little brother. His name is Gibdoh on YouTube and on online. Since I'm not gonna share your real life name because that would be really weird for me to do that.
Hello.
Hello, he says. So we're
Hello.
gonna talk about uh, video game difficulty and how it's so crazy and different depending on which game you play. So I guess to start off, like, what do you think is the most difficult game that you've played?
Um, Most difficult game that I've played. It's dude, all right, you want to know what? I think I actually have an answer to that question. It's the original Ninja Gaiden Sigma that released on Xbox. I recently got they had like a triple pack on the Nintendo Switch store, and I got it, and I'm like, this is like the most obtusely difficult, like nonsensically difficult game that I've like played. Like its difficulty just is one of those old school game difficulties, like how a game from 2001's hard difficulty is nowhere near as hard as like a 2016's game's hard, you know?
Yeah.
But like I that was one of the games that I just had to put down because it's like this is just I don't know, maybe the port is just horrendous and I just maybe I'm just not good, which is also a very distinct possibility, but I think it'd have to be Gaiden Sigma, the first one. That game is just ridiculous. It's too much.
Was it just hard because like it was bad game design, or was it hard because it had like legitimate challenges that like made you have to like really be mechanically good, or a lot of enemies or something with a lot of health, you know?
I think with a lot of excuse me, I think it's the same thing with a lot of games that are older is that it's a product of its time. And so I think a lot of the difficulty in it stemmed from the fact that it's from like, you know, Lord only knows when Ninja Gaiden Sigma was released. But like a lot of it I feel was very cheap. And like Ninja Gaiden, like if you go back and play the original, like I think it's the SNES Ninja Gaiden Sigma, or not Ninja Gaiden Sigma, but just the original Ninja Gaiden. That game is super cheap, dude. They spawn enemies in midair and like knock you down, and it's like it's so dumb. So it's like there's a part of it that's like it's living up to its heritage, but like I think a lot of it was just very cheap. Um, a lot of it was like just not giving the player enough healing items. Like I don't know, like I said, a lot of the issues could possibly stem from the fact that I am just a bad player, but like it felt like they were intentionally withholding a lot of items from you that would just help you, like especially healing items, dude. Like if you're gonna be throwing so many enemies at me, like and have all the kind of BS things that it had in it, like please at least throw me more healing items so that I can at least like withstand it because it got too much at a point. Like I got
What's
maybe like I don't know how far into it, like a couple levels deep. Uh and it just got ridiculous, dude. And I was like, dude, I'm not gonna sit here and just subject myself to this. And then I think after I said that, I think I went and played Darkest Dungeon, which is like, which is even worse. which is like, which is like, I'm not gonna subject myself to a burning hot furnace and jumping into lava. So,
It's funny that you say like that enemy spawns are cheap and that healing items are withdrawn from you, because I feel like that's a problem that you could say a lot of games nowadays kind of have, like especially games that are built around trying to be hard, right? Like I know this is a really easy example, but like I feel like Dark Souls is like that. I feel like Dark Souls, in at least in the beginning, especially in regards to um lack of healing, right? Lack of healing items or lack of healing ability, at least whenever I would play Dark Souls, felt like it was really difficult in the beginning. It's not so difficult like when you have an established character and you're 2 or 3 playthroughs in, right? But like on that first playthrough, I feel like it's really difficult to get through a hard area with only like 2 Estus, you know?
Yeah,
And
I
it just be
mean,
like, I don't know what I'm doing, I don't know where I'm going, and I only have 2 Estus flasks, and it makes you feel like, well, you know what, I don't know why you would expect me to be able to do all of this, especially with in regards to like cheap spawns. Like Dark Souls is the king of cheap spawns. Dark Souls is the king of putting enemies in such a way to where it's gonna maximize your frustration and maximize your annoyance. You know, where like
yeah.
I'm willing to bet you that you could probably take a calculator to the amount of time that you're playing those games, and most of the time that you're playing those games is because you died and you had to restart, and you're just playing the same stuff over and over again because you just keep dying. And I'm not entirely certain if that's good game design or if that's just the way Dark Souls is, because I know a lot of players, and I've heard this sentiment a lot where they go, well, that's just how Dark Souls is, right? Like that's just the core of Dark Souls. It's just a game that has BS monster spawns and no healing items at first, and you're just supposed to get through it. It's supposed to be frustrating, but then you question, it's like, well, is that really good game design? You know?
Well, I think Dark Souls is a very uh the word's escaping me. It's a very unique uh case because that like what you're describing with like early Estus games, right? Like if we're taking DS1 for example, um every new bonfire you light, you get 5. You know, if you're at a flat 0, you get 5 back.
Yeah,
Um Firelink without any upgrades to it will give you 10
yeah,
without upgrading the fire or the bonfire. Um Upgrading the healing is like one of the game mechanics of the game is like finding the fire or the firekeeper souls, upgrading your flask so it heals more, using humanity to upgrade the bonfire so it's giving you more, you know, getting the rite of kindling, stuff like that.
yeah.
That's like part of the game design and it's part of the game mechanics, and I can definitely see that. But with something like Gaiden Sigma, it was like healing items aren't like getting more healing items and doing that sort of thing isn't like part of the game. It's just like there are shops sometimes that will have healing items, sometimes they won't have anything, and there's not like unless you know
It's
in
like one of those
con-
old. It's like one of those old style games where it's like those old platformer games where where it's not part of the design, like where it's like all of the health items are collectibles, like Castlevania, where all of the health items are collectibles that are hidden around, and if you're
right,
not
but
really aware as to where everything is and you're not optimizing yourself, then you're gonna
right.
struggle.
um and again, anything I say about Gaiden Sigma needs to be taken with a grain of salt because I didn't get like that far into it. I'd say maybe 30 to 40% into Gaiden Sigma, but like to my knowledge, what I played of it, there was no mechanic that entailed like, oh, you heal more, unless I'm forgetting it, of course. But it's like, oh, you heal more, or you more healing items are scattered or whatever. That
Yeah,
it's just like there are healing items in the game, but like there's no mechanics centered around them. They're simply just healing items. And so I think if it's like Dark Souls in which the healing items have mechanics centered around them and that you can level them up and get more and it's a part of the game that makes the game better, you know, subjective, but makes the game better in that way, I think that's great. But if it's like Sigma where it's just like, yeah, you just have them occasionally and you know, most of the time he won't even give them to you, so get fucked, you know. It's like
yeah. One game that I feel like exemplifies a bad mechanic put into the game that was meant that I feel like should have been explained in some way, shape, or form immediately. It was Metroid Prime 2, with the ammo system. And the mechanic I'm speaking of is when you shoot a when you shoot a destroyable object that would give you like health or something with one of your special beams, with one of your special weapons, it will give you ammo of the opposite of that weapon, of the opposite of that
Right.
to you. But that's not really explained in the game. And so what you end up happening is you have this really strange sort of difficulty spike. And maybe like a spike isn't really the word for it. Maybe it's just like this really strange sort of ammo economy difficulty where you start running out of ammo because if you're not privy to where all of the ammo upgrade locations are, you know, you're gonna not have a whole lot of ammo, and those are the best weapons, you know. So you're not gonna be wanting to use your ammo, what precious ammo you have left on boxes, you know,
Right.
to to get more ammo, and you're not gonna think about that, you know. You're not gonna think, well, maybe if I destroy this box with my light beam, I'll get dark beam ammo, right? Like that's not
Hmm.
something that in your head you would be like, oh, that makes sense, right? And in your head, you're like, well, I only have 10 light beam ammo and I have 5 dark beam ammo left. I'm not gonna waste my most powerful guns on like some boxes, right?
Hmm.
I use my power beam, and power beam doesn't get you any ammo at all. It's just health and like missiles, right?
Yeah.
And what you end up having is you end up having this really strange sort of this really strange struggling economy of ammo where the game is just like it doesn't throw enough ammo at you whatsoever and kind of forces you to play with the power beam in your missiles most of the time, even though you have these two other beam attacks that you can use.
Yeah.
It kind of forces you to play with the basic level stuff until you just happenstance happen to figure out. They're like, hey, if I destroy this box with my dark beam, I'm gonna get light beam ammo. Or if I destroy this box with my annihilator beam, I'm gonna get both ammo, right? Because that's what an annihilator beam does. You destroy a box with the annihilator beam, and it gives you ammo for both guns, right?
Yeah.
But like you wouldn't ever know that, and that I feel like is a really poor implementation of a mechanic that like that really didn't need to be. Like they could have just went away with that whole thing and just made enemies drop ammo more often, right? Or just make boxes when you destroy boxes have a chance at spawning a random ammo type and just make that more often, right? Like make it so that way your ammo is plentiful, you know?
Yeah. I mean, plus we've had the discussion about the Metroid Prime 2 ammo situation. How I think that they should have never introduced ammo into the game. Then it makes no sense. But you
Yeah.
know, a sort of hidden mechanic like that um is really cool. I love hidden mechanics in games because you feel a really nice sense of accomplishment or like discovery when you find them out. But like not something as like integral as ammo. Like when I think of a hidden mechanic, the first thing that comes to mind is A Link to the Past, where and I think they actually hint it in the game where if you use the ice rod to freeze an enemy and then you hit it with the hammer and break it, it drops magic vials for you. And it's like if you don't know that, it's not gonna like completely ruin the game for you, and it's not going to completely like it's not gonna make your struggle even harder, you know. But
Yeah.
if you know it, it's great. Like it's not essential to playing the game, is what I'm trying to say. But like with the box situation in Metroid Prime 2, it's like
It did feel kind of
especially
essential to know that.
yeah, I mean it's incredibly essential, especially when the ammo is so scarce and when the beams, like the dark and light beam, are the main weapons that you need to be using to fight the different enemies in the world.
And it's also not like they're just the main weapons that are needed to fight the main enemies too. It's also some of the progression on the map is locked behind those beams because sometimes you need to shoot a door that's only made for dark beam. You
Oh
need
yeah.
to shoot a door that's only made for light beam. And what if you just used all your ammo in the last fight? You know, it's like the game the game's progression is sometimes locked behind your ability to have ammo on you at any given
Yeah.
time. And I know that there were plenty of situations I remember hearing you talk about how when you were playing you were just like leaving and entering the same room over and over again trying to farm for ammo because you literally couldn't progress unless you got the specific ammo you were looking for.
Yeah, and
And
that was one of my arguments for having no ammo was that it's like, especially if you're gonna have the doors require the beams, which is a staple of the Prime games, obviously. But like, dude, if it's gonna take ammo to shoot those beams, and then you come, like you said, come up to a door after a big fight in a room, you have none of that ammo, then it's like you're completely screwed, and then you have to, go backtrack to find boxes, or like me, like just sit there and mope in a room wishing that you had infinite ammo for the beams. But if it's integral to the game, like the ammo economy in Prime 2, then it needs to be plentiful. And I hope that if they remaster the game for Switch, um that that's like the biggest thing that they need to fix in it is just like if they're keeping the ammo, just make it way more plentiful. But if they get rid of it and just have it, um be just regular beams like in Prime 1, then they need to fix and tweak the enemies, because some of those beams just shred through them. Like the light beam in the Dark World, that just shred through enemies. So,
yeah, I mean they could probably have also just like if they really couldn't come up with a fair solution, I guess they really could have just kind of either neutered the beams a little bit or at least, you know, made the enemies a little bit tougher. Cuz I remember in Metroid Prime 1 it didn't ever feel like, at least with the exception of like the ice beam, that your extra beams were that much stronger. Like when you were going into like lower strength areas with like the plasma beam, obviously you were like one shotting everything, right?
mm-hmm.
But if you went into a later area like the phazon mines with the wave beam, it was taking you 20 shots to kill one guy with the wave beam. It wasn't like wave beam
Right.
was particularly more powerful than the power beam or the plasma beam, right? And it did feel like a lot of the time those beam upgrades, at least in terms of the wave beam specifically in Metro Prime 1, the wave beam felt to me like it was a beam that was designed for a boss mechanic in the boss area where you get the beam from, and it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't really meant to and it wasn't really meant to be anything more than just like, hey, this is the beam that you need to damage the boss, you know,
Right.
because you almost never have to use it. And the wave beam in Metro Prime 1 doesn't it doesn't do what the wave beam is supposed to do, which is go through terrain or go through enemies, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Technically the plasma beam is the one that's supposed to go through the enemies, but the wave beam doesn't go through terrain. And I understand, like in Prime 1 everything is 3D, so imagine having a beam in a first person 3D Metroid game go right through terrain like that. Like there's no I couldn't even imagine, like I couldn't imagine the logistics that are needed to be able to program that kind of interaction on a game like Metroid Prime.
Yeah.
So I understand that it's not going through areas, but it didn't feel like it was stronger. So they probably could have neutered the beams a little bit and made them
Well,
less powerful in favor of just having infinite ammo. You know?
yeah, and I having just replayed Prime, I played it twice, um, the remastered version. I played it once on the normal difficulty, and then the second playthrough I did hard mode. And it's like, just speaking about like video game difficulty, like I think that's just something. And Prime isn't the only one that's guilty of it. Like notably Skyrim was, because what Prime did for the hard difficulty was just lower the damage of your weapons.
Yeah.
And it's like
That's what
Skyrim did that
Skyrim
too.
does. Yeah. Skyrim just makes you
Skyrim does
do
that too.
25% of your damage on legendary.
Yeah, and it's like, that's not difficulty. That's just lowering your damage.
Yeah,
Like,
that's not making
just
things harder for you. I mean, it is harder, I guess, but it's not it's not making things harder in a fair way, you know.
Well, it's difficulty through tedium because then you're just sitting there for however much more time that it would take to kill that enemy, you
And
know.
and
And
all and
and
all that
crime,
really did was all that really did was force you into using sneak more, right? All it really did was force you into being like a sneaking mage or sneaking like archer
yeah,
more often. It just
the
made
the
you
inf-
abuse the it just made you abuse the multiplier of sneak more, you
yeah,
know.
the infamous stealth archer build,
Yeah.
is like, and that difficulty, and games, a lot of games suffer from that idea where it's like, all right, well, it's difficult, let's just make you do less damage and just make it longer and make the fights just drag out. Then it's not hard, then it's just, I don't want to be doing this fight, I want to be playing a different game, you know.
Yeah,
um
unfortunately, I feel like, and this was gonna be something that I did bring up because this is an example of in more recent weeks, an example of bad design is when Destiny 2 Lightfall came out. They made all these changes to difficulty and they made the game a lot harder to play. And essentially, in Destiny terms, what ends up being a difficulty increase is just making your weapons do no damage and
mhm,
making enemy health really high.
right.
And I was telling this to my wife um, a little bit ago. I told her, I'm like, the amount of time that I spent on doing the Legend campaign for Destiny 2 Lightfall was a little over 7 hours. I spent a little over 7 hours on it. And the amount of time that I spent on the regular version of the campaign on another character, the non legend version, was just over an hour.
Mhm.
So the difference between spongy and non spongy enemies is literally about 6 hours of gameplay.
Mhm.
And that's not good game design, right? To make enemies just spongier and make your guns do less damage is indicative of poor game design. Like there's no fun in shooting a guy in the head 800 times before he dies, you know?
Yeah, and you know that has been a consistent problem with Destiny since D1, is just when you come across yellow health bar enemies that it's just, you sink back in your chair because it's like, well, all right, well, this fight's gonna be like 15 minutes
You're
long.
planking away at a boss for 20 minutes cuz,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah. The
health
second
is
you see
so
those
big.
yellow health bar enemies, this one's for the D1 homies. You pop a ammo synthesis. You pop a heavy ammo synth, and it's like, all right, let's just get this friggin' over with. But
Yeah, well, see,
it
I feel like though, and maybe this is just me, maybe this is my nostalgia glasses going on a little bit, but I feel like Destiny 1 didn't have that problem nearly as much. I feel like Destiny 1, at least like Taken King and Beyond, I never really felt like in Taken King and Beyond that when I encountered a yellow health bar enemy, like a boss level enemy, I never really felt like I was gonna be there for for like 30 minutes, right?
no,
And I think part of that, I think part of it is because Destiny 2 is going more the route of like what World of Warcraft does, which is health gating, right? It's like they're trying to turn every boss fight into sort of like a mini into like an encounter of like a raid or a dungeon where they're trying to like get you to like do a mechanic or do a thing, right? Or have to worry about ads in between doing damage phases, and they're trying to turn every boss into a into an encounter from like a dungeon. So they're health
hmm
gaining. Like I'm seeing this more and more often, like especially in like the seasonal activities, where like you're meant it's supposed to be made to where you just going in, killing a bunch of dudes and killing the bosses real quick, and then going and getting your loot and getting out. Right now they're gating health bars. Like every third of the health bar, the boss goes immune, and you have to deal with a bunch of ads. Right,
yeah,
and it's like that's partially why I feel like Destiny 1 didn't really have that problem, because in Destiny 1 when a boss was there, he was there, right? Like if you can kill him in 2 hits, go kill him in 2 hits, right?
hmm
If you can pop a super and like shoot all your Gallahorn at him, right? If you can shoot all your Gallahorn at him and like use a super in 30 seconds, do it, right? Like the game doesn't punish you for doing that. It's just like it's just a show of skill more than it is, or just a show of firepower more than it is a show of anything else. You know, it doesn't. It's not ashamed to let you just kind of go ham.
Yeah, and in D1, now I can't speak for D2 because I loathe D2 and I don't play it. But in D1, to your point, those types of enemies, where you get that sink back in your chair feeling. There was only a couple of them that I can notably remember that were like that. Like if my memory serves, that PlayStation exclusive strike with the Nexus or whatever, that
Oh,
thing that thing
yeah.
took so much health to
The
kill,
one from
dude.
Taken King, the one with the rotating walls that push you along the area, right?
Yes, and
Yeah.
that had huge health. Um, and Valista Arc and the Shield Brothers, both those two strikes, those both felt like they were kind of spongy, but spongy bungy.
Well, you know what
There's two.
well, you know what's funny about Shield Brothers is that Shield Brothers is one of the first strikes where they do actually implement health gating, right? Where
Yeah.
like Shield Brothers, you do like a quarter of their health each, or you do half their health each, and then they run away, and then they become immune and run away, right?
Hmm.
And then they go hide away, and then when they both come out, they're both at full health, right? So it's like you basically did nothing.
Yeah.
That was like one of the first strikes where they were like actually introducing health gating, I think.
Well, and
And it
I,
shows obviously when you're saying,
y-
well, that strike was one of the strikes where I felt like I was just plinking away. It's like yeah, because that was the strike where they introduced health gating.
yeah, and I don't necessarily think that that's a very good mechanic to have. Is the few times that I've played Destiny 2 with you and we're like doing a strike, you've heard how ravenously I start complaining because it's like I jump in with my super like all ready to kick ass and take names, and chew bubble gum, and then the second I pop the super, the boss goes into invulnerability phase, and
Yeah,
then I'm just sitting there like a dumb, waiting while my super drains, and I use it on a couple like red health bars that die in one like precision shot. And then like the same thing with my heavy ammo is I'd like jump in to do a cool heavy ammo moment, cool like Destiny 2 trailer moment, and they'd just be invulnerable. And it's like, why like ugh. It works it
yeah.
works for like MMO games because of the way MMO games are built, but like for a first person shooter, it doesn't gel very well. They need to edit that a little bit, but
Well, especially if you're not exactly on par with everybody else too. Like I know you don't have the same kind of weapons that everybody else does, and you're not a consistent player, so you're not gonna have everything else that everybody else does. So you're not gonna have like the super like kill bosses in one rocket sort of like OP damage weapons that everybody else does. So like
yeah.
not really knowing what people are running and not understanding it to the fullest extent, like how quickly that boss's health is gonna melt. Feels extra bad when you're like, all right, I'm gonna go use my heavy or I'm gonna use my super, and you use your super and then the boss is immune, right? And it's like because the boss went immune because we just did 2/3 of his health in like two rockets, and
Yeah.
we basically rushed through the phase and made him like force immune himself. You know?
Yeah. And to that point, if I don't know when the invulnerability phases happen, you know, as a infrequent player, then like I could absolutely remember, if I was playing D1 strike bosses, like I know when those guys go invulnerable, but with D2, if you're an infrequent player and you don't know, then you just waste your super and then you die and then you just get all mad and then you finally beat him and then you get a road complex from year one. You're like, sweet, because I don't
Sweet.
because I don't own any of the DLC. Sweet,
Sweet.
sweet road complex. I remember getting this 6 years ago.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's like ultimately, I guess the question is like, so like in terms of health gaining, like, is that difficulty though? Is health gaining and then introducing a really basic sort of mechanic that is like kill enemy, get moat, shoot boss with moat, and then and then like shoot boss with mode to get shield down and then do damage, right? Is that difficulty, or is that just annoying gaining? Because I know, like, especially in Destiny 1, and this is something that I think Destiny 1 did really well, or at least made me feel like it did really well, right? Was what helped Destiny 1 feel like there weren't situations where you were just like feeling like the boss's health was so high was burns, right? Like burns in Destiny 1 were way higher. It was like
Yeah.
300% extra damage. Right? So when you had like solar burn and heavyweight on, right? And
Hmm.
you were running into Valstaric with solar burn and heavyweight and you were shooting your Yellowhorn rockets were like two-shotting him. Right? It's like
Hmm.
you just were killing everything in one rocket. Right? But like solar burn and heavyweight now in D2, solar burn is like 25%, right?
Wow.
And heavyweight is like another 20%. Right?
Screw
So
your
it's like
fun.
so it's like nothing, right? Like you basically get no bonus whatsoever. Right?
Hmm.
And that's why I feel like bosses are also way spongier in Destiny 2 is because the burns are much worse and it doesn't give you the sense of like, hey, it's a modifier that's really helping me, you know.
Right.
And then
And
everything else around you deals 50% more damage to you. So the enemies get a higher multiplier towards you than you do towards them. So
yeah, and to that, question, it's like, is health gating difficulty? I don't think so. I think because it's just waiting. You're not there's no like I'll probably be in this discussion be referencing Elden Ring and Dark Souls a lot because I love Elden Ring and
a
Dark
lot of
Souls.
Destiny 2 players would a lot of Destiny 2 players would berate you like on the forums. They would berate you over this comparison. They think that they're nothing alike, and they would
Well,
berate you over it. But I think it's
well
a
they're
fair point because difficulty in games is difficulty in games. It doesn't matter
well
what
they're
genre.
they're not alike. You can't compare Destiny and Elden Ring. But what you can do is you can compare the difficulty. Like you said, it's just objective difficulty. Like in Elden Ring, you know, it's like there's to my knowledge, and I've played through a lot of Elden Ring. Um, Played through it like 4 times. If I'm remembering right, there's never like a boss that you deal like half of his health and then you just have to sit and wait. Like no boss just becomes invulnerable while you just sit and wait. Like maybe Renala while she's casting the full moon, but like waiting isn't difficulty. It's not actually difficult to just sit and wait for your opportunity to strike again. And then that's where, like, excuse me, I'm getting a lot of saliva. Um like um like in Destiny where it's like, all right, I dealt X part of his health bar in damage, he just like the Shield Brothers. All right, they just left they literally like
They literally
they
said
stick around
sayonara and left.
yeah, they literally leave the arena, which is just hilarious. And it's like it's not difficult. They're literally just walking away, and then just random enemies come out. So it's
And then
just
they come back out 20 seconds later with full health. Like the developers like
yeah,
gave them a polish in the back room real quick.
yeah. And so it's like I don't think health gating the way that Destiny does it, because I can't speak for like say like Final Fantasy 14. Like some MMO games probably do health gating pretty well. Like Diablo 3 had health gated bosses too. I remember. Like I recently was playing Diablo 3 and there was a lot of health gated enemies. And it's not difficulty. I just think it's just a cheap way of elongating a fight. And I don't
Now,
necessarily think that developers think that health gating is a form of difficulty. Like I said, I think it's just a really whack game mechanic that they use to elongate a fight to make it seem like you're at like it's like an epic fight. It's like, no, I'm just sitting around waiting. It's like waiting in line at a Sam's Club. It's
now
like,
see this is why I will say this. So, you played King's Fall all the way through, right? So you got the orcs and you beat orcs, right? So you remember the fight of orcs, don't you?
yeah,
So you remember how in the orcs fight, spoilers to anybody that hasn't fought orcs yet, but he's like a fucking 5-year-old raid boss. So if you haven't played him, then that's your fault. Um, Oryx's boss fight is set up in such a way to where the mechanic is where you do the damage, right? And you have to survive long enough to do the mechanic, and then the mechanic does the damage, and the difficulty quote unquote of the fight is that you have to survive long enough to do the mechanic enough times in order to kill the boss, right? So is that difficulty is the fact that the mechanic requires skill and execution in order to pull off. But when you do it enough times, it did kind of feel like I know when I played King's Fall back in Destiny 1 a lot of the time, I really did feel like I was just kind of slouching in my chair. You're not really worried, right? I was just like after you do it enough, it feels like you're just kind of like in the waiting room, right?
Mm-hmm.
But technically there is difficulty in it because you did have to learn the mechanic and you did have to learn the execution, but all of the execution was in the mechanic and not in your personal ability to do damage, right? Is that
Yeah.
difficulty? Is it difficulty to an extent to have a mechanic that does all of the damage in a boss fight and requires your skill in order to pull it off? But like eventually you're gonna learn it so much that it just becomes a cakewalk. Is that difficult, or is it only difficult when you, the player, are the deciding factor in how quick you can kill a boss?
Uh, I think the conversation of difficulty is completely shifted when you're talking about something like raid bosses, you know, of which I have very little to no experience with. Like, I don't play games that have raid bosses in them, like, so I don't. Is it difficulty? Is the mechanics of a raid the difficulty? Like,
Or is
yes
it
and no.
or is it the combat challenge, right? Is it supposed to
Well,
be the combat intertwined with the mechanic, or is it supposed to be the mechanic, right? Because
uh,
a
I
really good
think
a really good example of what I think should be difficult is Wrath of the Machine. You remember Wrath of the Machine with
I never
Axis?
played Wrath. I mean I watched Wrath, but I never played it.
Okay, so Wrath of the Machine, like Axis's fight, his final fight was basically you have to do the mechanic in order to damage him, but how quickly you kill him is based on your personal execution of damage, right? So you can kill him in a single phase, but you can also do like half of his health in a single in a single moment of damage and then just choose not to continue the damage phase on and
Hmm.
then move the encounter further, right? So like you'd have to slam this energy thing onto his back in order to stun him, and he had like 20 seconds of being stunned, and then he'd teleport to the next section of the map, and you'd have to stun him again, do another 20 seconds, and then you'd have to do it again for a third time, and then do another 20 seconds, right? You could choose in that 20 seconds of damage, if you did enough damage to him, you could choose to just not continue the fight and just move on to the next phase, and then let him teleport, and then let him not be stunned, and then let him go back and reset the phase. The when the entire fight was based on um, you being able to stun him, so you can get the damage off.
Hmm.
But all of the damage that you did to him was your fire team was doing all of the damage. So the mechanic wasn't doing damage to him. It was just you needed the mechanic to be able to do the damage.
Hmm.
So all of the
Oh,
challenge in the boss fight was basically can we do enough damage to him to kill him in 4 phases.
yeah, and I think, and again, Destiny is a very unique example because it's taking MMO, taking basically World of Warcraft raiding and sort of elements and transitioning it to first person. So I think it's a very hard beast to sort of nitpick and decipher. But like, yeah, like understanding the mechanics of a fight, especially in like a Destiny raid sense, um, it can be difficult, like trying to make sure that you know, what you're doing is correct. Like Fogoth, you know, like making sure that everybody's on the same page and doing what they're supposed to be doing, doing their tasks right and making sure that they're, on time. All right, do you have the ore? Blah 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 blah. Like that's it's difficult in a different way because that's just coordination difficulty. It's like are we coordinated as a team? Like, is our teamwork on point? Like that's where the difficulty is, I think, in that case. But I, I don't know. I'm struggling to sort of pinpoint difficulty in Destiny and Destiny raids because
So then
I
let's
I don't
so,
play Destiny
so
anymore.
then let's move to a topic of a game that I am significantly less knowledgeable about, and to a game that you're a lot more knowledgeable about than I am because you played it a lot more. What do you think about Borderlands 2? Does Borderlands 2 do difficulty good?
Um,
Because you're a lot more knowledgeable in Borderlands 2 than I am, and you played a hell of a lot more Borderlands 2 than I did. And Borderlands 2 is a game that is like Destiny in the way that they're both looter shooters. They both have a similar sort of gameplay loop, but um, Borderlands 2, from my understanding, handles difficulty in a completely different manner.
um, I wouldn't say they're too dissimilar in how they handle their difficulty, Borderlands and Destiny. Um, especially Borderlands 2. Like, the true and ultimate Vault Hunter modes are I think are very good examples of difficulty scaling and like raising the difficulty. Um, but it can ultimately just be boiled down to increasing your damage, increasing the damage and health of the enemies. Um, it gets a lot more muddy when you bring in um, Destiny 2 is the first one to introduce the overpowered levels. You had to beat something called Digistruct Peak, and once you beat Digistruct Peak, you unlocked a new OP level, and it would raise the damage and the stats and all that of enemies and stuff like that. And it could go to OP 10 was the highest in Destiny or not Destiny 2, Borderlands 2 that you could go was OP 10. Um, and I think in Borderlands 2, um, so very similarly to Destiny. Excuse me, I'm burping. uh, very similarly, those games are very similar in the way that the encounters are pretty much entirely based on what gear you have. Like, um, for Borderlands 2, like if you're going into Pyro Pete, you know, without the correct items, like, or we'll use Terramorphous. Like, if you're going into Terramorphous without the B shield, you're gonna have a hell of a time trying to fight him. Basically any boss in that game, if you're not doing it with the B shield, you're just doing it wrong. But like, like in Destiny, if you're going into a certain fight, you know, that is easier with certain weaponry. And if you're going into that fight without that weaponry, you're just putting yourself at a disadvantage and it's making it more difficult. You know, if you're going into, if you're playing Borderlands 2 and you're going into an OP 10 Digistruct Peak with, Deputy Salvador or like, Salvador in general, because he's just the most broken character in the entire game, it's gonna be super easy. But if you're going in with like Axton, you know, like a Torg Axton or something, it's gonna be a lot more difficult just because of the gear that you have or the gear that you don't have in this case. So
So
I
would you
think
say
board
that? So would you say that Borderlands 2's difficulty seemed to be more gear driven, like more gear and class based driven, rather than the enemies themselves are just super difficult, or rather than the game's natural difficulty is harder?
I think so. I mean, like you and it's a lot of it just boils down to just understanding how to play the game. Like if there's a lot of things in Borderlands 2 where if you just have the right gear, you can one shot everything. Like Zero, his skill Bore, you can use Bore with the starter pistol from the start of the game that does like 10 damage. You can use the 10 damage pistol in OP10 with Bore and one shot almost every boss because it's Bore. The way that Bore works, the skill works. You know, um, and like what was her name, Gage, like if you're using Anarchy Gage, the way that she works. So I think a lot of the difficulty in Borderlands just stems from the gear that you have and the skills that you're using coinciding with the gear, making sure that your skills are blending well with the gear. If you're using Deputy's badge with certain pistols and like Deputy's badge Infinity Pistol, where it's like the Deputy's badge increases the fire rate of pistols by like 50% or something, so the Infinity Pistol turns from like a machine gun to like a Gatling gun basically. you know so it's also been a long time since I played Borderlands. I watch a lot of Borderlands 2 content still, not a lot but a fair amount. But I don't know. It's that that game is also kind of difficult because its difficulty just again boils down to enemies' health and damage is increased. Yours is also increased, but not as much as the enemies. But I think Borderlands 2 does a far, far better job of balancing that out than Destiny does. I think they do a lot better job of making sure that the enemies are going to do an absolute mad amount of damage, but you are as well. Whereas in Destiny, enemies are going to do a mad amount of damage. You're going to be shooting them with pixie sticks and feather guns. You know, I don't know.
Y- You know,
Those are hard examples.
see, there is a there are a couple of games where I feel like they mastered where I feel like difficulty is just right. And this first game will probably come as no surprise to you or to a lot of people that know me, but I think PSO has a really good difficulty. Not just in form, not in just in terms of um, the way that the difficulty scales in the different difficulty levels, but also in the way that difficulty after a certain point in the game becomes a lot more about your your positioning and enemy placement and enemy diversity too. As someone that has created quests before and it currently has two of them up on a server, I can
Shameless
say,
plug.
huh?
It's a shameless plug.
Yeah, yeah.
Shameless plug. I got
they,
two of them up there.
yeah, I have two quests, not a whole lot, but I do have some grounds of which to believe what I believe, which is that all of the difficulty in PSO is in your personal character placement, your personal position, and enemy diversity and enemy placement. Enemy placement is such a huge factor in in success, right? Because if you get too comfortable, if you as a player you get too comfortable with standing in the middle of some dudes and then just throwing down a freeze trap and killing a bunch of guys, right? And then and then a developer is smart enough to be able to know that you're just super comfortable with abusing very simple strats. They're gonna throw enemies at you in a specific way that you're not gonna be able to handle. Like I have I have played this game for so long, and there are still moments in this game where I will look at this, where I will look at a spawn, or I will look at a certain combination of enemies and realize I would probably turn my game off in that instance. That's how frustrated I would be because there like maybe that's just me being bad still because I've never claimed to be good at this game ever, but I will say that um, some enemy placements are just really frustrating, and all of the difficulty in the game, I think at at a higher level, at the highest level, is in your ability to position properly and adapt to enemies. right? Because there is a lot of nuance. And um, one game that I feel like mirrors that in a very good way that I think no other game other than this game mirrors PSO in that way is the original Zelda. Zelda 1, in the way that its dungeons are designed, I feel like mimics that sentiment exactly. Where the game isn't hard, right? Like the game isn't difficult to an extent, right? Like the game is just about killing stuff with your sword from 2 feet away, right? Like it's like just pressing one or two buttons, right? So it's not difficult. But
Mm-hmm.
your positioning in a dungeon and enemy placement in a dungeon can make your life so much harder, right? If you don't prioritize where you're standing to counteract where enemies are placed and where they're standing, you're gonna have a tough time. I've gone into some dungeons where different enemies are scattered around the rooms, and I just move in the wrong direction, or I stand in the wrong spot, or I don't prioritize a certain enemy, right? And I just get my butt whooped, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well,
I feel like that's true difficulty. Is I feel like telling the player this is up to you, right? Where you stand and what you decide to prioritize is what's going to make this game harder or easier for you. And if you can prioritize correctly and you can stand in the right spot so you can position yourself in such a way that is advantageous to you on a regular basis, that's what makes the game difficult or easy. Because if you do it right, it's easy, right? But the difficulty is in getting it right.
yeah, and it's interesting you bring up Zelda 1 because I was recently just replaying it. But like the idea of a fixed difficulty, one that just doesn't even change. It's like this is how hard the game is, you know, get after it. I think that's probably the most appropriate way of doing difficulty in a video game. Which is why I like the Souls series so much, is like there is no slider. The slider is how well you play the game and how well that you can, like you said, prioritize positioning and utilizing mechanics in the game. Like Zelda 1, I think it's difficult because it's old, like that's why they changed Link's slash in the Link to the Past to a horizontal sweep instead of just a forward stab, because the Dark Nuts are probably the most ridiculous enemies in Zelda 1 because you can only hit them from the side and from the back, and they're constantly moving unless you have the clock to freeze the enemies.
Yeah.
Um so and then it's like, okay, you enter a dungeon. This is what I love about video games. Zelda 1 is one of the best ever. This is what I love about video games. Is like you enter a dungeon and it's like, holy crap, this dungeon's kicking my butt, dude. Like I'm getting thrashed in this place. You can leave, go prepare yourself, and come back to face the difficulty of the dungeon. You
Yeah.
know, like in Zelda 1's case, a lot of it is very cryptic because it's Zelda 1, but like I'm getting thrashed in this dungeon. My buddy's playing the game. He told me he found a new heart container hidden in a wall. I'll go ask him where that heart container is and I can go get it. And then what I can do is I can farm up some rupees, get some healing potions, and re-enter that dungeon because I know I'm gonna be taking damage, you know. And then you can prepare yourself and get, super nice and prepared and practice and get better so that when you enter that dungeon, the difficulty is mitigated because you're prepared and you've practiced and you've trained and you're cool. You got your potions, you got your fairies. There aren't any fairies in Zelda 1, but you know, um, that's what I just love about Zelda 1 and about pretty much all Zelda games. It's like if you're having a difficult time, you can mitigate it. You can get better. You can go, and a modern example is Breath of the Wild translated that beautifully, where it's like if you're having a tough time with a boss or with a shrine or with a group of enemies, leave, go cook up a damage boost meal or go level up your armor or go do more shrines to get more HP. You can mitigate the difficulty of a game. And that's what I think again, Elden Ring does very well is like, yeah, new playthrough Margit, before Stormveil, is just miserable. He's super tough. But it's like, okay, go do more things in the open world. Go level up more. Go get a really good spirit summon. For me it was the jellyfish. Shout out to the jellyfish. Um, go get a good spirit summon. Go level up some of your weapons at the round table. Go back. Use the spirit summon. Use your new upgraded weapon, maybe with a new weapon art, and that difficulty is now dampened because you played the game and you used things in the game to make it easier for yourself. You know, and
Yeah.
it wasn't the fact that it's like, you know, this point's fizzling away from my mind currently as I'm speaking it, but you know, um, yeah, I agree. Zelda One was really good difficulty. A lot of its difficulty stems from the fact that it's friggin' old, and the translation of it is just abysmal. Like some of the NPCs who give you hints don't even give you the proper hints that make sense, like in the Japanese version. You know,
Yeah.
and so that's where a lot of it also stems from, is the fact that it's like, bro, the translation's not even correct.
Maybe
But
that's where the real difficulty comes from. It's in the translations.
yeah, it's him telling you
Knowing
Eastmost
where to go.
Peninsula. Yeah, Eastmost Peninsula, or did you get, or like, and even some of the accurate, um
Some of those old Castlevania 2 translations were like use the pendant on
yeah,
a rock in the middle of a cliff face, then jump into a hole. It's like what? It's
yeah,
like what?
it's just like, the Dongo dislikes smoke. I am error, and it's like, huh? It's
I, I am error.
I am error. It's like, what are you talking about? Or like,
Yeah.
like one of the examples is when, and I think it's like Dungeon 6, you have to give a bokoblin a piece of meat to have him move so you can complete the dungeon. But like, the way he says it is like, I think he says something along the lines of like, I'm hungry or something. And so you have to sort of piece it together that it's like, oh, he's hungry. Excuse me, I can go get a piece of schmeat, give it to him, hopefully something will happen. But it's I love Zelda 1. It's just super old. I want everyone to play Zelda 1, but it's old. Play the Switch NES emulator. They
Could
do
you
special
imagine if they
versions.
did? Could you imagine if they did like a remaster of Zelda One? Just kept the mechanics the same, just did a remaster of it.
Dude, I'd play it.
How
I
cool would
I
that
mean,
be?
like I said, dude, I was recently playing Zelda 1. I love Zelda 1. It kicks ass. That game rocks, dude. It carries a lot of what I love about video games in general.
Zelda One is pretty much the pinnacle of what I think video game difficulty should be. It's all left up to the player. It's just like the game just says like here, this is how I am, right? And you can choose to be good at it. And you can choose to struggle, or you can choose to, you know, you can choose to breeze through it. But it's all up to you,
Hmm.
right? And it
Yeah.
lets you as a player decide, all right, how difficult do I want my experience to be? You know, how
Yeah.
difficult
The
do I, or how much time do I feel like spending on this?
yeah,
If I
the
don't feel like
issue
spending
is,
a lot of time, then I can just be good.
yeah,
There
just
really is
get
no
good.
other way about it. I can just get good, and it really all just does come down to it, doesn't it? It all just comes down to getting good. That is one lesson that Dark Souls will always teach. It always teaches you to
Well,
get good.
get good is to an extent a good argument, except for when things are just completely bullshit. Like, okay, for
Okay,
those of
casual.
you, yeah, for those who know, um, Melania Blade of Mikola, I will never defend that boss. Never, ever, ever, as long as I live, will I defend Melania Blade of Mikola. Having a boss heal on hitting you is dumb, especially in a Dark Souls game, because you're gonna be getting hit a lot. You know, like, to me personally, Melania's bullshit. I don't like her. I love her lore. I love her design. I love her fight. I love her music. The idea that she heals when she hits you is dumb and is bullshit. You know, flat out. Like, I'm trying
Yeah.
to think of other examples from Dark Souls games. Like, Bed of Chaos is another one where it's like, if you, like, it's just pushing you into holes in the ground. Like, it's not as bad as Melania because it's like you can dodge them, you just go get the flip ring or whatever. But like, that's also like kind of bullshit. You know, like Ninja Gaiden Sigma, that game's bullshit. I'll never defend that game. That game's stupid. You know, or
Yeah.
like when things are left heinously up to RNG, you know, and you have just absolutely no control over it. Like one of my favorite indie games. I love it to death, but I also hate it to death. Is Darkest Dungeon. It's like a lot, like everything in the game. You know, they say it's like it's not all the RNG. It's like no, a lot of it's RNG. You know, and so it's like there was plenty of times where I'd get to the sort of bitter end of a long encounter, and all I needed was this one character to land this one swing to win, and he missed, and it's like, and then the boss killed me and killed all my guys. It's like it's not difficult if my guys swinging aren't swinging because of just a random number being rolled. You know, if I was controlling my highwayman and I swung and I missed, then it would be on me. But it's like, nah, dude, it's completely out of my control. It's completely out of my control. I can't win. Just sounding like a crying piss baby. It's like, dude, it's out of my control. Like I can't win. You know, when things are taken out of your control, then it's not difficult. Then it's just like you're at the will of the game, you know, and that's no good.
Yeah, you do sound like you're like a fucking crying piss baby, don't you?
Oh yeah, dude, that's my perpetual state of being is whining and crying, whining and crying about games that I wish I was good at. Like a Ninja Gaiden Sigma player would look at me and just be like, "Well, dude, you just need to use the block more." Like, dude, stop. I'm just gonna ravenously crap on Ninja Gaiden Sigma the
Now,
entire
see,
time.
now see what you brought up actually does actually remind me because that is a good question. Turn-based games, turn-based games that have random number generator rolls that allow you to hit, right? It's like the chance to roll. Morrowind has that, right? And as you know, you would go ugh, right? And
Ugh.
every Morrowind fan is
Whoa.
screaming at you right now. Every single person that has played Morrowind knows this. Morrowind is an Elder Scrolls game where its entire attack formula is based on rolling a die, right? It's rolling the invisible die to decide if your stats are high enough versus another enemy NPC's stats in order to hit them and do damage, right? That's not really difficult, right? That's not hard. It's not hard to just click a button over and over again to finally hit something because your stats just aren't top tier, right? But then, but then, what is difficult about Morrowind, right? If the entire game is basically just a big number roll generator, what is hard about Morrowind? Because I don't think you have never completed Morrowind, have you?
No.
Yeah. So then I asked, like, well, then what is difficult about Morrowind, right? If the entire game is just a number generator, then what's hard about it, right? Well, it's kind of difficult to say exactly what's so difficult about it. It's difficult to explain.
It
It's
it's
it's kind of just the experience of losing, I think.
well,
What's
it's
difficult about Morrowind is that you lose so often, and that you, because you're losing so often, that you have to play the game in such a way that you have to play it knowing that you're probably going to lose, so you almost have to over prepare.
it's it's difficult one because it's old, right? Game games back then were just difficult because they're old. But personally, like from what I've played of Morrowind, it's difficult because of the random number generation. You know,
Yeah,
it's difficult because when I swing my friggin' sword, there's a strong possibility
that
that
nothing will
it
happen.
that the little sound will play and it'll go and I won't hit the enemy even though my sword physically enters their body and it's like nope you actually didn't hit them and it's like well that's dumb like why even do you have that be a part of the game
Yeah,
you know
we're the entirety of the smoothness of every battle and every encounter that you do in that game is revolved around whether or not your stat checks are rolling correctly. You know, like your Dungeons and Dragons dice roll is stat checking you properly, you know? Like
well
it
then
doesn't feel like
it,
that's not really difficulty. It's just kind of like grinding the game, mindlessly grinding the game enough to get your stats to a point where you know that every time that you roll a die that you're going to pass the stat check.
well with like D&D like true tabletop D&D that's entirely different because you can work your way out of situations but like in Morrowind which is like an argument can be made that its combat is modeled after old school D&D, but like
It pretty much
it
is.
yeah, but it's like there's no way you can work your way out of that situation. You're literally just stuck there. If you swing at an enemy and it doesn't do anything, you can't work your way out. There's no like,
No,
you know,
I will say this. I will say this. In the early game that is correct. For the first like probably 15 levels of the game, you are boned if you can't hit your guy. If you can't do damage and you miss on a consistent basis, you are boned. Like you will struggle. But the moment that you hit like level 20, you know, the moment that you hit like level 20 to 25, the game starts popping off. Because what happens is now the full game is open to you, right? The entirety of every mechanic of the entire game is open to you. Once you start getting your skills up and you start passing your stat checks, you start getting more opportunities to do things, right? To do different things. So the difficulty of Morrowind ends up it ends up becoming, can you put in enough time and live long enough to see yourself is basically it's exactly how I can't remember who said this, but this is a perfect quote, right? Can you live long enough and put enough time into the game to see yourself go from nothing to becoming a god? Because that's what happens in Morrowind. It's like if you put enough time into it and you live long enough, then you will become a god in Morrowind. You you just will. That's just the way the game is. Like the moment you hit like your level 20s, the moment you hit your 20s, you're like invincible. Like you just can't die, and you do so much damage, right? Because all of your
yeah,
stats are huge, and the entire game is opened up where like the moment that you hit those levels and the moment that you start leveling up your skills, what you just said, where like there's no other way to get out of things. The moment you start leveling up those skills and the moment that you get into that point where like you're just godly, that's when those options open up. Is that late game where you're like, well, you know what? I can't hit this guy, but instead what I'm going to do is I'm just going to shoot a spell at him and to make him frenzy against his allies, and his allies will go kill him, right? Because his allies are stronger than me, so I'm just going to frenzy his allies and have his allies kill him, right? Or I'm going to summon or I'm going to summon a fucking golden saint, and I'm going to have my golden saint kill him, right? Because my golden saint's stronger than me, right? Like it's just the options open up, but the difficulty of Morrowind and the difficulty of all random number generators typically is um just playing the game long enough and putting enough time into it to see yourself go from rags to riches.
right.
A game that I feel like does not follow that but is still random number generation is Knights of the Old Republic. I'm not sure if you played the Knights of the Old Republic report on Switch or the Knights of the Old Republic 2 report, right? Well, you'll
I
notice.
played
Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say I played a little bit of the first one, and then I got to an area that was much like
Guidance Sigma, and I was like, this is dumb, and I put it down.
Right. So encoder and coder 2 especially coder 2, right, is it's still a random number generator for how you attack, right, and how much you attack, but um you cannot grind levels like you can in Morrowind. You can't grind levels like that. And your levels almost don't even really come into that much of a factor, right? In regards to how well you can swing, right? What comes into a factor more often than levels is your gear. So coder's difficulty is a gear check, right? Is the game saying, all right, do you have good enough gear to be able to pass this stat check, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then if you don't, you're obviously not going to. Like skills do have a little bit to do with it, right? But what I found is that especially in Coder 2, if you don't have good enough gear, you are not going to be passing those skill checks. You're not gonna pass them, and you're just gonna get mollywopped every time, every fight.
Yeah, and but that just opens up a new conversation on game design because like especially with Morrowind and Coder, from the little bit of Coder 1 that I experienced, having the game be like screw you tedious and annoying and difficult at the beginning is not what you need to do. Like you need to you no dead ass like it's not what
Screw
you
you, difficult.
yeah like dude I got off of the mine in Coder 1 and then I enter into that you know exactly what I'm talking about, that big stupid area where you're trying to get a ship and there's like three landing ports and there's all these bandits standing around and it's like my guy my companion dies near instantly, like he breathes in the direction of those bandits and he's like, and then he dies instantly, and then I'm left to fight all like 15 guys by myself. They're isolated into groups, but it's like you're it's usually a 3v1. And then it's like, okay, I'm trying to fight him, but the random number generator is telling me that my sword swing that literally slashed through the guy didn't do any damage. And it's like the intro to a game needs to be, you know, I guess the word I'm looking for is stern. It's like it doesn't need to be just, you know, standoffish and obtuse. Like have it be stern and establish the fact that it's like, yeah, this will be a difficult game, but it's like don't
But
don't
it's
turn
fair.
players
It needs to
off.
be fair.
Yeah,
This
it
is
needs to be
fair difficulty.
fair. Like in Morrowind, it's like to your point where it's like, yeah, 20 levels into Morrowind, that's when the game pops off. It's like, okay, but how long is that gonna take?
Yeah,
It's
it's
like,
the difficulty in Morrowind is just getting to that point.
yeah, well, it's like, okay, do I want to spend um and like this
30
is
hours grinding my character up to a point where I become a god.
yeah, a lot of I've seen a lot of games that have this argument to it where it's like you just need to get into it, and it's like, okay, well, how long is that going to take? About like 60 hours, and then the game clicks. It's like, bro, if the game doesn't
Bro.
click off, if it doesn't click off the goop, why play it? I don't want to have to sit like Dwarf Fortress. I tried playing Dwarf Fortress, dude, and it's like, dude, I don't want to spend like 150 hours learning how to play a game for it to then click. Like I've played games that are like that where it's like, okay, it's pretty like thick and dense, but like when you get like a little bit into it, but it's like it cannot be more than like 15 hours. Like if the get into it phase in a game is more than like 10 to 15 hours, it's like, dude, you need to edit it a little bit because I don't want to have to play Morrowind for like 40 hours to get Act Sadmore up to level 50 or like to like level 20 so that he can actually do damage. Like that, there's no way.
You know what
Act Sad,
game, you know what kind of game genre I really feel like I don't really think is a good kind of difficulty. This actually just popped up in my head in regards to how hard things can be sometimes is games like Valheim, right? You know what I'm talking about. How you start with nothing and you have to build up to something, right? And the world around you is difficult because you have nothing, because it's just the game makes it hard for you to get started, makes it hard for you to, you know, get up there,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
That I feel like that's really poor, right? Like why does it take me 30 hours to get to a point where I can go and chop wood without feeling like I'm going to die? You know,
Well, I
it's like
think I think in Valheim's case, it
or games like Valheim.
games like Valheim, and especially in Valheim's case, um, they do it. They do nothing like because that's I'll use like the term like Minecraft start because that's just what Minecraft is. You start with nothing, but like in Valheim, you have a nothing start, and the general base area accommodates that very well, I think. Like in my time playing Valheim, the starting area, the starting plains of Valheim accommodated that start very well. The second you get into like the marshlands, and then especially the little the
The
plains that
plains,
looked like
yeah,
the plains that looked like it was like autumn.
and the
Dude,
snowy mountains too with the wolves. Oh my god.
those blood mosquitoes one shot you, and it's like that's where the argument of like difficulty spikes is like difficulty spikes in gear checks. It's like, okay, you can have difficulty spikes in gear checks, but you cannot make them just so ridiculous that it's like, you know, what like all the progress that you made is now completely negated because you tried going into this new area and it's just like completely thrashing you every time you try to fight.
Well, yeah,
And
but
maybe that's just
it's also because it's not really. It's also because it's not really. God, what's the word? It's not very. It's not shown very well, right? Like when we went into like I had no idea when we were playing Valheim and we went into that plains area. How were we ever supposed to know without prior knowledge, right? Without us knowing beforehand, how were we ever supposed to know that we were going to encounter a flying enemy that was going to one shot us, right? And
it is like
and when
nearly impossible to see on the
and
screen.
when you get one shot in games like this, you lose all your shit. So it's basically like you're starting from square one all over again, right? It's like
Hmm.
if you're going to make the game have such high difficulty spikes and have such tough sort of like if you're going to make the game have such a high difficulty spike and have such tough points where out of nowhere you can just get killed instantly, let us keep our stuff, right? Don't take all my stuff away because I didn't know that if I walked into this area that I was going to get beamed, you know? Like
Hmm.
I didn't know I was going to get one shot. I didn't know when I went up into the mountains I was going to encounter one wolf and he was just going to fucking take half my health away, right? I didn't know that. And the game didn't and the game did not tell me or show me in some way shape or form that this specific section of the area was harder, right? Like when I go and like that's another thing is like when I go into an area, sometimes the area will tell you, "Hey, this is a hard area." Sometimes the area will just tell you that, right? Like when we went into the marshlands, I knew it was a hard area, right? I didn't need to question it, right? When we went into the marshlands, it was scary, it was dirty, it was dark, and they were full of undead creatures everywhere. And I was like, I know this place is hard just by looking at it. I know it's dangerous, right?
Hmm.
But when we went into the plains, it was just a big open field. It was just big, sunny, open field full of grass. And you're like, oh, this looks nice, right? Looks great. And we walk in, and then we get one shot by tiny little mosquitoes. And we're
Yeah.
like, the the area did not correlate to difficult for me. You know, the
the
area seemed like it was going to be a nice, serene place with maybe a couple enemies that were maybe a bit tough. You know, obviously since it's a later area, I was like, maybe some of these monsters will be tough if I am not careful, right? But it doesn't seem
Mhm.
like I'm gonna be walking into a one-shot fest. But we walked into a one-shot fest, and we lost everything, and we're like, great, now we have nothing, and it's like we might as well just go back to the first area, right? Because now we have nothing.
Yeah, and you know, in Valheim's case, it was especially difficult because getting stuff in Valheim was so tedious because it was like you've got to get the ore and then you've got to put the
Oh
ore
my
through the
god.
smeltery and then you got to put that ore that came out of the smeltery into the geltery.
There's no
You know,
streamlined process for anything. You can't
yeah,
just click a
it
button and
was
have it just make something.
it was pretty rough, but like um I was gonna say um they could have had a system like Borderlands uses, and I know some other games use it, where if you go into a new area and you walk up, like I know Witcher did it too. Witcher 3 did it, where if you walk up to an enemy in an area that you've never been before, it's gonna have a skull next to its name or like its health
Yeah,
bar. Where
exactly.
it's like where it tells you like, hey dude, like you can try, but this dude's gonna thrash you. And then you could be like, oh, okay, bet, and then I'll come back later. When I'm a higher level and I can actually like do the friggin' fight properly. But like
Yeah.
that's just an issue with Valheim. It didn't have health bars, so they can't they could like I don't know. They could give you like a little like mystical like signpost that says like you should at least have mythic armor on
Yeah,
before you enter this
you
area.
should at least be level 30 before you come here, you know?
Yeah, have at least beaten this boss and have at least done this and have
Yeah.
this because if you enter this area the way you are now, you're gonna get thrashed. And it's like, oh, okay, you know, but
They could have just told us. They could have just made it look dangerous, you know?
oh yeah, I mean, yeah,
But I
like
mean, like maybe that was part of the aesthetic. Is that like it's a nice serene area filled with a bunch of killer insects, you know, and you'd never know it was dangerous until you went in. Maybe that was part of the initial charm for them, I guess. But it's
mhm.
like I wasn't charmed at all when I went in and I got one shot and I lost everything and I lost 25 hours worth of grinding.
If
Oh,
anything, I
because
was
I
not
just
charmed.
happened to wander into an area that looked like it was gonna be okay, you
I
know?
was actually the opposite of charmed. I was frustrated.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I was
you know,
incredibly angry. It's like, dude,
yeah,
come
and
on. Like, if you're gonna one shot me, just let me keep my stuff. You know, if you're going to have enemies that are so strong that the moment I walk into the area, they're just gonna instantly give me and turn me into a fucking pile of bones, right? Like, don't don't turn me into a pile of ash, and then be like, but by the way, you have to run all the way back there to where they turned you into that pile of ash and get your stuff back. You know, it's like, what do you
especially
think's gonna happen? I'm just gonna get turned into a pile of bones all over again. Like,
especially when when the trek back feels like the first Lord of the Rings movie, and it's like it's like an at least an hour run back to where you died, and then you run the risk of getting bit from by a skeleton with a bow 3 yards away from you, and then you die, and then your old gravestone is disappeared and your new gravestone
you know
appears and you
what would
just
have
lost
helped?
everything.
You know what would have helped with that so much is I just thought about it. What would have helped with that so much is either have the gravestone be where your base is, or have you pay like a magical currency or something like like a homeward gravestone to where you can like transport those items to that gravestone at home, you know? Like have to
Mm-hmm.
pay some amount of currency or whatever, have like some magic sort of like fairy dust or whatever that you have to pay and then have those items transport back to you, right? That way it's not so like hilariously punishing when you wander into a snowy area and you get fucking eaten alive by
Yeah.
wolves, you know, when you're all alone and you have one ration left and you're hungry and the stamina bar is at zero and you're like, man, I need to get back, and you're like a centimeter away from crossing the biome and then 8 wolves come and attack you, you know?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, what the hell? You know, like
Yeah. Well, Valheim could have.
game difficulty needs to be game difficulty as far as like spikes in difficulty, like when the game just gets abnormally more difficult than ever before. That always needs to get paired with some quality of life improvement, right? It always needs to get paired with some loss prevention, right? If you're gonna
Yeah.
throw a intensely hard enemy at me that requires me to be infinitely higher than what I was supposed to be at the time, then don't make it so punishing when I die.
Yeah.
I probably would have kept playing Valheim if I felt like I went in and I felt like my death was fair and I lost all my stuff, I probably would have kept playing.
Hmm.
I probably would have been like, yeah, you know what, I fucked up. I shouldn't have gone in, or I shouldn't have played this way, and then I
Yeah.
probably would have kept playing, right? But when we went in and we were like, we go into the plains and all I hear from you is, what the hell? I'm almost dead. And then you get one shot and I'm like, what the hell? And out of nowhere I get attacked from behind and I get killed instantly, right?
Hmm.
It's like, yeah, okay. And then the the 30 hours of grinding that we had is gone, you know? it's,
Yeah.
it's like, what the hell? Like, I did
Yeah.
not
Well.
just spend all this time on this game for nothing.
Yeah. Valheim was kind of rough in that way. Excuse me, I'm yawning. Excuse me. And they could have, you know, and all of this discussion can be, um, needs to be prefaced by the fact that, at least not me. I don't develop quests for a game, but like, I'm not a game developer. I don't know how to do that, so it's so much easier for me to backseat game develop than actually develop a game. Where I'm like, this is bullshit. It needs to be better. And it's like, well, it's easier said than done, Jack. Like, come and develop a game. I'm doing it from the perspective of being a whiny little gamer.
Yeah,
You
but
know.
there is value in playing the game and having an experience of the game and being able to look at it objectively and be like, you know, objectively this feels really bad to have to play with. Like I said, if the death was more fair, right? If our deaths were fair and we went in and we knew that the guys were tough and we had an idea as to what we were getting into and we went in and we just fucked up, right? And we didn't play good and we died, I feel like we would have kept playing, right? Like we would have been a little bit angered and upset about it, sure, but we would have been motivated to keep going,
Hmm.
right? But the fact that we wandered in and it just felt like the game literally just slapped us in the face and said nah, and just killed us instantly and took all of our stuff, right? It basically, if it punched us in the stomach and took our lunch money, you know, for no reason.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, at that point, it's like, why did we even bother? Why did we even play, right?
Yeah. Losing out on that gear. I think games that do that.
Especially
Minecraft
so
pop.
unfairly, you know?
Yeah, like games like Minecraft popularized that idea of when you die, you drop all your stuff, and you got to go and get it. I think that it creates a very interesting game dynamic that I do for the most part enjoy. But dude, it's like in Valheim's case when you spend, you know, 30 hours, farming up this new gear and getting to a point where you feel like you've done good enough, you know, to get to this new area, and you're like, all right, let's do it, and you get completely thrashed, and then you have to run back and get your stuff, and then there's a possibility that you might not even get your stuff and you might lose all of it. It's like it it can be it can go from like cool and interesting mechanic to unbelievably discouraging, put the game down and don't play it again sort of thing.
Yeah.
You know. It toes that line very, very um I don't know how you'd say that. It toes that line. It you
You know
know.
what game popularized that? It wasn't even Minecraft. You know what game popularized that drop your items on death thing?
Hmm.
RuneScape. RuneScape popularized that. Because in
Hmm.
RuneScape, when you die, you drop all your shit, right? And it's all on the ground. But what happens is it gives you like a 2.5 minute timer on all your stuff that says, hey, if you can get here in 2.5 minutes, you get all your you get all your stuff with impunity, right? Your stuff doesn't disappear in 2.5 minutes, but it is invisible to other players for 2.5 minutes, right?
Hmm.
So you have 2.5 minutes to get back here and get all your stuff with impunity, right? Where nobody is going to see your stuff. And then the game offers you enough teleport locations, right? You can teleport pretty much anywhere in the game with a click of a button, right? So if you're out in like fucking Falador and you get killed by a knight or something, right? And you go back to Lumbridge, if you have the ability to teleport, you can just teleport straight to Falador, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and you can just go grab your stuff, right? But like on Valheim, there's no way to just teleport to a nearby location unless you make a portal, right? And
Mm-hmm.
making a portal is such a difficult thing to have to do, and it's such a restrictive thing because you can basically take nothing with you, right? You can't, like, you can take what's on you pretty much, but if you have an item that, but it, if you have an item that the portal does not like or does not appreciate, you can't take it with you, you know? So it's like,
Yeah.
so it's like,
It.
RuneScape does it okay in the fact that like, you lose your shit, and if you do lose your shit permanently, that shit sucks, right? But
Mm-hmm.
it gives you enough avenues to be able to recover your stuff with impunity without being sort of like annoying, right? Like there are times where like you will lose your stuff and you'll lose it permanently and you're like, "Wow, that really blows. All my hard work is gone." But it comes with the territory, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that's just the kind of game that you're playing. And there are always
Yeah.
going to be those moments like Minecraft is the same way, Valheim's the same way. If you lose your stuff, you lose your stuff, right? It sucks. You know, Minecraft when you die with full diamond armor on and you lose all your shit, that blows, right? But at least in at least in terms of RuneScape, it does give you an avenue to which you are capable of recovering those things relatively quickly.
Right. It's just Valheim sucks, and
And
this is the
Valheim's difficult. I
anti-Valheim.
guess Valheim's difficulty is the fact that it power spikes you so hard and doesn't really let you know that it's power spiking you, right?
Valheim's true difficulty is the fact that you chop a tree down and it bonks you on your head and you die, and
Dude, you
you have
do
to go to
take
your
damage,
dead
don't you?
body.
You do take damage from trees falling. That's so effed. I don't know why they did that.
I think it's hilarious,
It is
especially
funny
if
sometimes.
your homie's just like walking by and you chop a tree down and it bonks him on the head and he just falls and crumbles to the ground. And he's like, "What happened?" And you're like, "Oh,
I don't know, dude. Bad luck.
no."
Get good.
Yeah, get good. Just get good. Just get better at the game. This game's not even difficult,
That's the
dude. Come on.
ultimate end message: is no game is difficult as long as you get good.
Yep, no game's difficult as long as you're a good gamer.
As long as you're an
Are
alpha,
you
as long as you're an alpha gamer, no game is too hard for you.
as long as you have that alpha sigma grind set on your gaming, you can get after it, you know. I guess I'm just a beta gamer and I'm not.
Absolutely.
Whoa, dude. Hey, no. I beat Sekiro. I beat I beat Sekiro and I did I beat Millennia, you know.
You like shifting from game to game, saying what you beat with
Yeah, I
with
beat
like no context. Like I beat
I beat
Sekiro.
Sek
Wait, I beat Millennia. Oh wait,
I
I beat Dark Souls 2.
I yeah, I beat
It's like
Dark Souls
what?
2. I beat all the Dark Souls. I beat, I beat this, I beat that. I beat Zelda 1, I beat its second quest, I beat Master Quest.
Hey, I placed first in all F-Zero GX racetracks. Okay, I'm good.
Whoa, dude. That's like actually huge.
That's God gamer level right there.
Hey, dude. I don't know. I can't
All
think of
right.
any good gamer flexes that I can give.
We don't have any good gamer flexes. I can
Yeah, I
wait.
have no.
I can wave dash in melee.
Bro, I can't even do
I
that
didn't. I
anymore.
didn't.
I can't even
I
do
didn't take
that.
it. I didn't take a shower for 3 weeks when I played melee. That's the real flex right there.
Yeah, well, I mean that just comes with the game, bro. Being clean, uh, having grease covering your entire GameCube controller allows you to BXY and do the wave dashes and wavelands better. You know, it allows you to do the tech better if your controller's hella greasy. This is not a dig at This sounds like a really bad dig against melee players. I love melee.
Yeah, he loves melee, but he doesn't like the players very much.
Just not Hungry Box.
No,
sucks.
like melee community sucks. I'll go out and say it. Melee community is trash.
Yeah, it's not. It's not the best. Not the best. There's the topic of our next podcast is going to be the.
Dude, we should talk shit about the melee community in our next podcast. We should make
Well,
this
'cause
a weekly podcast where we just talk shit about different communities.
yeah,
Next
just
up on our podcast, Dark Souls community. Does Dark Souls need an easy mode?
yeah. Next up on the Malcontent podcast, this thing that we don't like, then we're just gonna complain about.
I'm gonna title this one the Malcontent Podcast.
Please do. It's just never happy with video games. Even though we talked praises on a lot of games, no, we're always just not happy with the games at all.
The Malcontent Podcast, episode 1. Why
Episode
why games suck at being hard.
episode 1, difficulty in games and Valheim needs to be better.
Valheim needs to do better.
It's all we did is just talk trash on Valheim, even though I really liked Valheim when I was
did
playing
too.
it.
It was great. Man. Fuck Valheim, bro.
Yeah,
Tired
fuck
of it.
Valheim, dude. The game sucks. Wish games were better.
Alright,
There's
Gibdoh, thank you very much for joining me on our now new podcast, on the now Malcontent Podcast.
on the Malcontent podcast.
Episode 1 of Malcontent Podcast has been completed.
You're welcome. I was glad that I could provide a very what's the plural of the word malcontent viewpoint towards video games. I'm glad I could I don't know, flex my Dark Souls and my souls.
Contribute towards the negativity.
Yeah, I'm glad I'm glad I could perpetuate negativity in the gaming community by talking trash on everything that sucks. You know. Have me next time when we talk about current games versus older games. I'll have a lot more to say.
Join us next time for when we talk about how trashy 343 is on Halo 5.
Oh my!
And Halo Infinite,
dude.
Why Halo Infinite is terrible.
Yeah, dude, don't even get me started, bro. Don't even get me started. I could go ad nauseum on that trash.
Maybe that will be the next thing we talk about.
PSA, if you're still playing Halo Infinite, you're the problem.
Thank you for joining us.
Bye.
Bye-bye.